For question number 7, we're asked to consider 2 points. One's at 2, 8, and the other one's at negative 4, 2. And we're asked three pretty straightforward questions, right? What's the distance between these points? How far apart are they? What's the location of the midpoint of segment AB? And what is the equation of line AB? So just for convenience, um, I graph these. I don't think this is something that you should have to do or want to do during a test. I just think it would be it's useful to kind of help our discussion right now. So with these points plotted, the question is, well, what's the location of their midpoint? Well, the midpoint is the location, and basically somewhere in here in the middle, right, is going to be the location of the midpoint of these. And the way that we set out to find those is we just consider two dimensions kind of in isolation, right? I can look, I'll use red here, as I can look at this as the change in my x value. And I can ask myself, where is the middle of this change in x? And I can see x starts at negative 4 and it ends at 2. Well, it turns out if I add negative 4 and negative 2, I get negative 2. And if I take half of that, I get negative 1. So right here, oh, I'm sorry, that this is at 2, which goes to here, right? So if I, again, it's still 2 and negative 4 is negative 2, and half of that's negative 1. This ends up being the midpoint. Well, it's the middle of the x coordinate. So I know that my midpoint lies on that line somewhere. And then I do the exact same thing for y. I can see that y is at 3 and y travels to 8. So I'm trying to find the middle of this line segment. I'm sorry, it starts at 2 and goes to 8. 2 plus 8 is 10, and half of that is the number 5. So the midpoint is along this line for this thing. So the location of the midpoint is right here. It's when x is negative 1 and y is the number 5. So to summarize that, if you want to write down, kind of a convenient rule for it, what you can do is, in order to find the x coordinate, right, we're going to take the two x values we have, negative 4 plus 2. We're going to add them and just divide by 2. And that ends up being negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1 in this case. And then we do the same thing for y's. We're going to take our two y values, which is 2 and 8. When we add those, we get 10, and half of that is the number 5. So that's the location of the midpoint, and that's the answer to the first part of the question. The midpoint is at negative 1 comma 5. Well, actually, that's not the first part. That's part B, negative 1 comma 5. The other question I have there is, the first question, part A, is what's the distance between those 2 points? So if I look at the points, right, if I want to figure out the distance between them, what I'm looking at here is let me erase all this stuff. What I'm looking at is a right triangle. I would look at this as a right triangle. And I've got a certain change in x, and I've got a certain change in y. And the distance I'm trying to find is from the one point to the other. So I need to find the length of this line. Well, when I've got a horizontal and vertical line, they form a right angle. So I can use the Pythagorean Theorem to figure out how long what turns out to be a hypotenuse is. So my change in x is going, again, from negative 4 to 2. So if I was to go 2 minus negative 4, this is 6 units long. And if I go 8 minus 2 for my change in y, this is also 6 units long. And this is small enough that I can count these. So what I'm looking at is this this triangle with legs of 6 and 6. So this, right, I could label this anything. I'm just going to call it d, the distance between the 2 points. I can say that d squared is equal to 6 squared plus another 6 squared. So d squared is 36 plus 36, which is 2 times the number 36. And the reason why I write it like that is because I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. And I end up getting that d is root 36 is 6. I get 6 times the square root of 2. So d is 6 root 2. And if I look at that as a decimal approximation, it's, let's see, 6 times the square root of 2. It's a that does not look right, is it? It is right. It's about 8.48 units. Okay, so that's it is. Let me write this down. This is 6 times the square root of 2, which is about excuse me, 8.48. Okay, and there's one final thing that we have to do. We have to come up with the equation of the line that goes through AB. So I don't need the graph, so I'm not going to look at that, but I do know if you look at it, I need to know the slope, right? And then I need to use perhaps one of these points to write it in point slope form or to figure out the y-intercept. So let's go ahead and just go ahead and look at these points and come up with slope. So slope is the ratio of how much y changes divided by how much x changes. And if I look at my y values, they're here and here. I double underline them. So I could, for example, say the change in y would be 2 minus 8. And if I was to write that down, get back over here, I would go 2 minus 8, and that would give me up in the numerator the number 6. Okay, so that's the change in y. 2, whoa, 2 minus 8, that would be negative 6. Let's not get all carried away here. 2 minus 8 is negative 6. And my change in x is going to be negative 4 minus 2. Okay, negative 4 minus 2. That looks like negative 6 also. That's crazy. So that means that my slope is negative 6 divided by negative 6. Or in other words, my slope is just the number positive 1. The slope is positive 1. So I'm going to go ahead and write things in point slope form. Remember, that's y minus a particular y value that you know equals the slope times the quantity of x minus the particular x value that you know. So if I pick this point, for example, I've got an x value that I know and a y value that I know. So I'm just going to plug those in along with the slope and get the equation of this here line. So I would write y minus 8, that's the y value that I know, equals my slope of 1 times x minus 2. Distributing the ones, very simple. This just becomes x minus 2. And then finally, if I add 8 to both sides, I get y equals x and then plus the number 6. So I think my slope is 1, and I think my y-intercept happens at 6. So I'm going to write down this equation. Y equals x and then plus the number 6. And just because I have the graph here, I want to just take a look at it. Yeah, it looks like it's going through a y-intercept at 6, and it looks like the slope is up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. That seems reasonable. In fact, if I start at the number 2, I could go to 3, 4, 5, and then 6. That's perfect. Yep. So that is question number 2. So think about all those different parts, right? How do you find the location of a midpoint? How do you find the distance between 2 points? And how do you find the equation of a line that goes through 2 particular points?